And welcome to Angus Council's meeting Thursday, 3rd of November 2022. The last, no, it's December. It's the 15th of December 2022. Before we commence the formal business, I'd advise that as chair of this meeting, I have agreed that both Councillors Bell and Shepherd can join the meeting remotely, and the clerk will advise if they wish to address the meeting. And I think they are now being brought in to the meeting now.
Yes, Provost.
Thank you. Also, as members are aware, appendices A and B for report number 400/22, item 7, have not been sent to members in line with the required 3 clear days before the meeting. However, in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 11.1.7, as chair of this meeting, I determine that the appendices to be considered as a matter of urgency, as the report and appendices required to be considered by Council before the end of December in terms of the statutory reporting timetables. Council's consideration of this report and appendices cannot be delayed until a later meeting of the Council due to the time-critical nature of the decision making required in terms of this report. So we're sorted out that way. Okay, thank you. Right, moving on. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Provost, there's apologies from Councillor David Fairweather.
Thank you. Declarations of interest? No, right. Number 3, minutes of the Council and committees. In terms of A, the minute of Angus Council of 3rd November, can I defer to the clerk?
Thanks, Provost. Members, I'd like to advise you that there's an error in terms of item 5.1 of the final paragraph of the minute of the 3rd of November, and it should form part of item 4.2, the Council Bailey item. Item 4.2 will now include the final additional paragraph, which will read, thereafter, in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 16.11.2, Councillor Fairweather requested that his dissent be recorded from the foregoing decision, following which Councillor Fairweather left the meeting.
And moving on, for approval subject to the amendment to the 3rd of November minute, can we now approve A, Angus Council of 3rd of November, and B, Special Angus Council of 22nd November? Minutes of the committees. Minutes C to K are for noting. Is that noted? Thank you. Appointments, Angus Licensing Board and Civic Licensing Committee. Provost Brian Boyd has intimated his resignation from Angus Licensing Board and Civic Licensing, and therefore I ask for nominations for Licensing Board and ask for a seconder. Is there a... Oh, Councillor Wan.
Yeah, I would like to nominate Craig Fotheringham. Thank you, Councillor Fotheringham.
Okay, and Councillor Proctor. Any other nominations? That's fine, that's great. And therefore then, nominations for civic licensing.
Same again, thank you, Provost.
Okay, and same seconder? Great, thank you. Any other nominations? Great, thank you. That's sorted. Children and Learning. Deputy Provost Linda Clark has intimated her resignation from Children and Learning. I'm asking for nominations and a seconder. Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you, Provost. I'd like to nominate Councillor Braze.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Devine. Any further nominations? Great, thank you. Standards Commission decision. The Council is asked to consider the decision in relation to complaint reference LA AN 3546. Any questions or comments? That's fine. Okay, moving on to number 6, appointments to outside bodies with an update. Do we have any questions or comments at the present time? Great, thank you. I'll then defer to the clerk to take each of these appointments.
Thanks, Provost. The first one we're dealing with is the Angus Citizens Advice Bureau, and there's 3 places on this body. Is there any nominations? Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you. I'd like to make 2 nominations. Could I nominate Councillor Devine and Councillor Shepherd, please?
And seconder, Councillor Breeze. And is there a third nomination from anyone? No.
If the,
Right, Councillor Whiteside.
yeah, if there's no nominations from the, any of the other members, I'll nominate Councillor Braze for the 3rd
Great.
position.
Councillor Breeze. There's no further nominations. So that's Councillors Devine, Councillors Shepherd and Councillor Breeze have been nominated to serve on the Angus Citizens Advice Bureau. Okay. The next one is the Forfar Daycare Centre, and there's 1 place, and I'd ask for nominations to serve on this. It's in an observatory role.
I was going to nominate Councillor Clark. I think she's been asked to go on this one.
Any further? Oh, Councillor.
Yeah, can I nominate Councillor Ross Gregg, please? And seconder.
Sorry, was that Councillor Louise Nichol, wasn't it? Therefore, Provost, since we've got 2 nominations, are there any further nominations for the Forfar Daycare Centre? So we'll have to move to the vote. So this time you're voting for Councillor Linda Clark.
Sorry, just to interrupt. I see Councillor.
A question on this, because it's both these are observer roles. Is there any need for a vote? Can 2 people not go along to observe?
I don't think there would be an issue with that.
I don't see a point if we're going to vote on that, because if both parties are interested in doing it, why don't you let both parties go
Yeah,
ahead?
that's a good point. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Cheap.
And they're both Forfar members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Happy with that. So that will be Councillor Gregg and Councillor Linda Clark for the Forfar Daycare Centre.
Excellent. Thank you.
Right, the next one, oh, sorry.
Yes, sorry, I'm sorry.
The next one is the Association of Public Service Excellence. And again, there's 1 place on this, and it's in an observatory position. Is there any nominations?
Yeah, Councillor Fotheringham. Seconded by Councillor Nichol. Again, Louise Nichol.
I'll second that.
I think it was Councillor Wan, seconded by Louise Nichol, was it, Councillor?
And I think, can we follow the same format as we did for the one above? Just put them both on. All right, thought you saw the jet lag, sorry.
Could I nominate Councillor Cowley, please?
I'll second that.
So
Wish
rewinding
to
back to Councillor
go.
Cheap's comments, can both go on this one?
It is in an observatory position. They just said they would like 1 representative.
Could I come in,
Yes, of
Provost,
course.
and perhaps put a suggestion? I agree with Councillor Cheap that hopefully there's no issue in terms of there being 2 observers for each organisation. But if there is an issue, we could bring it back to the next
Yes.
council.
Great.
Thank you.
That's fine. So that's Councillors Serena Cowdy and Councillor Craig Fotheringham. The next have been nominated. The last and final one is the North East Scotland Agricultural Advisory Group, and it's 4 places, up to 4 places for this one. Is there any nominations?
Thank you. Can I nominate Councillor Braze, Councillor Bell and Councillor Devine for 3 of the places, please?
I'll second that.
Is there any further nominations? Ian Gall. And was that seconded by?
Nicole.
Is there any further nominations? No, so that's the 4 places, which is Councillor Bell, Councillor Brace, Councillor Devine and Councillor Gall. That's Provost. That concludes that item.
Thank you. Item number 7, annual accounts 2021-22 and annual audit report to members. This will be introduced by Ian Lorimer.
Thank you, Provost. Good afternoon, councillors. Just a brief introduction for this report. It was considered and scrutinised at the meeting of Scrutiny and Audit Committee at the end of November. It's a culmination of many months of work and the whole year of activity and transactions. Covers our governance, financial management, our accounting statements, and performance. It is a significant report in the life of the council, particularly around public confidence of our stewardship of public funds. Good news is that there's no qualifications on the council's accounts, either for the council or for the 2 council-run charities that are mentioned in the report. The auditor's report to members and the controller of audit, that's Appendix B. That was the paper that was missing in the original papers that the Provost referred to. It's pleasing to see that there's an independent conclusion from our external auditors that we've got effective financial management and financial control, and that the report also highlights the good work the council's done in terms of our governance, transparency, and there is also a reference to our best value assurance report, which of course came to council earlier this year and was very positive. The report also flags the very real financial challenges, financial sustainability challenges that the council has, and that's very much in the news and in our thinking in terms of how we address that. There are some recommendations from the report, a few recommendations in terms of areas of improvement. Those have all been accepted by officers. And in overall terms, I think it's a positive report, and say just a few areas identified for improvement, but happy to take any questions, Provost.
Any questions? Any comments? Councillor Gall first, and then Councillor Whiteside. Hold on. Councillor Whiteside. Any further comments? Councillor Gall.
Thank you, Provost. It was just a quick comment to say thank you to Mr. Lorimer and his team for the hard work they do. It's obviously an incredibly difficult, challenging time, and we are very grateful for the work that you bring together and the reports that you do. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whiteside.
I just echo that. That was exactly what I was about to say. Thank you, Mr. Lorimer, and all your team.
So are we agreeing? Item number 7? Number 8, Treasury Management 2022-23 Mid-Year Review, again introduced by Ian Lorimer.
Again, thank you, Provost. Again, just a brief introduction on this one is mainly for noting. It summarises what we've been doing in relation to our Treasury Management activities for the first 6 months of the year and gives a snapshot of that at the 30th of September. The period covered by this report has seen a lot happen, I would say, in terms of a rapid rise in inflation, rapid rise in interest rates, another interest rate rise announced today, quite a bit of turbulence in financial markets. So it has been an interesting few months in Treasury Management terms. Looking at the detail within the report, our overall level of debt has reduced slightly in the first half of the year. That's really because there were some loans that naturally matured. That's what's set out in Section 5. Interesting to note those loans were at much higher interest rates than you get today, but it's because they were taken out such a long time ago. We do still, however, have an underlying need to borrow in quite a significant scale, and that's set out in Section 3 of the report. So although our debt levels have come down, we do still have an underlying need to borrow to fund our capital spending plans. The section 6 of the report shows the Public Works Loans Board borrowing rates, and you can see from the table in that section how rates have moved, and they've moved quite considerably in terms of the high and low points. And that just gives an indication of how turbulent it's been over the last few months. And that makes it a little bit more difficult to do the treasury work that myself and the team do. Borrowing rates have gone up. That's not great news for us in terms of the costs of our borrowing. But the flip side of that is that the rates that we can attract for investment of our temporary cash have gone up, which means that we're generating much more income there now than we had previously. So a busy 6 months in the world of treasury management, Provost, but I'm happy again to take any questions.
Is there any, Councillor Cheap had his hand up there first. Any further questions? Councillor Cheap.
Thanks, Mr Lambert. Just a very quick question. Just when you were mentioning about the loans reduction between April 22 and September 22 of roughly 4 million, just an accountant's question is that the assets that these loans were used for, would they still be in existence at this time? How long were these loans taken out for at the outset? I'm thinking, are we still keeping loans in the books if we don't have the assets in place?
Yeah. Through you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Cheap. A good question. So the Council does not borrow against specific assets. So there is no match between the borrowing that has matured and particular assets. We borrow according to the totality of our borrowing needs. So it doesn't work like a conventional mortgage, let's say. We don't borrow against particular assets. So the maturity of those loans, as set out in Section 5, you can see one was taken out in 1989 and one was taken out in 1997. There are no specific assets matched against those loans because that's not how we borrow.
If probably I could just come back. It was just my question was just in case it was in relation to, for example, housing stock that had been demolished and then rebuilt. That was really what it was about. Thanks.
If I could just come back on that.
Yep, you get your second question, Councillor Cheap.
So one of the things that we do is try to make sure that as our debt is maturing, that we're not left with debt on an asset and no longer have the asset. So we've had a programme in place to clear those debts over a number of years, so we don't have that scenario.
So anyone got any comments? Great, that's fine. So we agree item number 9. Oh, sorry, no, that was 8. Right. So therefore, going on to number 9, 2023 staff pay deal costings or costs and funding arrangements. Again, Mr. Lorimer will introduce this one. Thanks again, Provost.
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of interest in the subject of pay in recent months. It's popped up in a few questions at committee, and I think I undertook to bring a report back to members on the costs and the funding arrangements, and hopefully my reasoning for bringing that separate report is now obvious, having had a chance to read this report, and hopefully that report is fairly self-explanatory. There is a lot in the report, particularly around the funding arrangements and how the additional government grant will be used and proposals to share that with partners. Happy, of course, to expand on any of those questions. Happy to expand on that if there are any questions. The report is a partial picture at this point because, as members will be aware, the pay deal in relation to teaching staff in Scotland is unresolved. So the costs in the report are based on what's been offered to teaching staff rather than what has been agreed, because there is no agreement as yet. The detailed calculations that we've now done on the cost of the pay awards show that will cost 2.9 million more than the Council had budgeted for. And that's after allowing for the additional government funding that has been put into the funding package. That figure may well rise depending on where the national negotiations on teachers' pay finally end up. That 2.9 million is about 0.8 million less than what had been assumed when the Council considered the medium-term budget strategy at the last meeting of Council. But it obviously still represents a significant additional and unbudgeted cost that we'll need to deal with. As well as the details on pay in the report also seeks agreement to make revisions to the Council's commitments within General Fund reserves. Reserves are not a solution to the Council's financial challenges, including those related to pay, but they can be used as a temporary solution to buy us time to find more permanent funding solutions. And so the report recommends decommitting a number of previously agreed projects. That will have the effect, if agreed, of increasing the Council's uncommitted reserves so that those reserves can then be used towards to help for, in the current year, for the excess cost of the pay deal, and in future years to help with the significant budget challenges that we face. And there's a bit of coverage of that in the report. I thought I should say a little bit about affordability. Affordability is something that's come up a few times at different committees in recent weeks. Now, what I said at the Policy and Resources Committee a couple of weeks ago was that context is key because it is a complex picture. And it really comes down to how you judge affordability. Affordability has some subjectivity to it because it depends on what you might be willing to do or to sacrifice in order to afford something. So just to explain my thinking a little bit more on this, when Council set the 22-23 revenue budget, the budget for the current year, we budgeted for a pay rise of 1.5%, which was worth about £2.8 million at that time. But we also, in setting that budget, had to use £4 million of reserves on a one-off basis to achieve a balanced budget, and that's a legal requirement. So in other words, when we set the budget, including that 1.5% provision, we actually had an excess of recurring costs compared to our recurring income of £4 million. So my view of that was that the use of reserves to achieve a balanced position on that scale means we didn't have enough recurring income to meet the pay award. So technically, and if you look at that as a measure of affordability, what we could afford as a pay award was nil. However, the position effectively now is that a pay award has been agreed. That is going to have a cost, as I say, an excess cost of about £2.9 million, possibly more depending on the teacher's position, and we will now have to find a way of making that affordable. So I hope that's clear in terms of the position we had in the budget and where we are now. Making the cost of the deal affordable in the current year will require us probably to use reserves, and that's what's proposed in the report. But since it's an increase in our recurring costs, we need to find a permanent way of funding that additional cost. Now that solution will be found as part of setting the 23-24 revenue budget into next year, but will inevitably have to come from a combination of increases in government grant, if there are any, and we'll see what comes from the government announcements today. It would need to come potentially from reductions in expenditure elsewhere in terms of staffing and other service provision. It could potentially be covered in part from increases in fees and charges and potentially increases in council tax. So how that affordability is delivered in terms of 23-24 will be a matter for the 23-24 budget setting process, but those would be the sort of measures that would need to be taken in order to afford that. It's probably worth highlighting that in setting the 23-24 budget, as well as dealing with that legacy from the current year's pay deal, the Council will also have to make provision for pay rises next year. Inflation is still expected to be pretty high next year, so that will continue to be a challenge. So, as I say, views on affordability can differ and depending on how you measure that and the consequences. It's also worth I think me highlighting, Provost, that in relation to pay decisions, staff recruitment and retention is a big concern. At present, the Council is struggling to fill many of its vacant posts. Pay levels and job security are undoubtedly factors in that situation potentially. So we need to look at affordability in that wider context. And the final point I would make is just to highlight that despite the financial impact of the 22-23 pay deals that have been agreed to date, for most of the council staff, it still does represent a fairly sizable real terms cut, despite the offer and the deal that has been done. So a bit more input there, Provost, than I would normally do, but it was really because there's been quite a bit of interest in relation to pay over recent weeks. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that very comprehensive resume of what's going on. With that in mind, there might be some questions, but any questions from anyone? Oh, Councillor Wan.
Thank you, Mr Lorimer. As you know, I've asked several questions on this over the months, so I'm trying not to repeat myself. But can I just clarify, you said, I think there was something in the paper there that mentioned for every 1% additional increase for teachers' pay, it works out about 700,000, is that correct?
Yeah, in relation to the position in Angus.
Position that we're at?
Yeah, for Angus teaching staff, yeah.
For Angus teaching staff, okay. Thank you.
Comments? Councillor Gall had his hand up there first. Any further comments? No, Councillor Gall.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Mr Lorimer. Your report, when you spoke, answered the questions I had. It was just the comment is my huge concern is obviously we know inflation's in 2022 has been as high as it's been for many, many years, and even in 2023 it looks to be as high as 5 or 6%. And it was just touching on the reserves coming into play, and you know your comments about affordability. It's a huge concern as what happens next year when people need to match that inflation again, when there's already going to be a huge squeeze this year to make this work. And it was just, you know, obviously it's an impossible conversation. I know you can't comment because we don't know what the deal's been done yet because it's not been agreed. But it's just, you know, next year looks, you know, it's how much time we're buying really with a stick and plaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gall. Any further comments? No. Right. Thank you. Moving on. Oh, sorry. No. The recommendations A to C are to note, D to G are to approve, and H is to note. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you all very much. Number 10, Angus Local Development Plan Action Programme Update 2022, and Jill Patterson will introduce this. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Provost. The Local Development Plan Action Programme monitors delivery of the actions, development sites and various policies of the current 2016 Angus Local Development Plan. Members will recall we brought a couple of reports earlier this year which looks forward to the new development plan, but this action programme looks at what's been happening in relation to our existing plan. The team undertake regular updates and are in contact with various developers across Angus, but the formal document in front of you today is prepared every 2 years and that is formally submitted to Scottish ministers. The cover report provides you with a summary of activity of what's been happening since its last publication, and the attached appendix is the action programme itself, which has the detail. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Cheap, saw your hand up first. And any other questions? Is it? Nope. Councillor Cheap.
Thanks, Provost. It's very general, Jill, on this one. On the development plan and its continuing, you know, I've been asked at Community Council, and I imagine other councils at their Community Council as well, how much Community Council will get involved in feeding into a future LDP from their own point of view. So, because we obviously want to engage with the community as much as possible. So it's just how formalised that will be and how the format will take and whatever time that will be at.
Thanks very much for your question, Councillor Cheap. Yeah, I think substantial input to the next round of local development plans. The new Planning Act and the accompanying secondary legislation has been delayed, which has impacted on our timetable and programme moving forward. We now have National Planning Framework in Parliament, which has given us a good kickstart to move that forward. The team are currently working on a sort of consultation engagement strategy, just the very bare bones of that. But a fundamental part of that will be speaking to members of the public, speaking to community councils about how they want to be involved rather than us preparing that for them. The new Act very much front loads the system. It looks for substantial amounts of engagement early on in the process and actually have them as a fundamental part of preparing the plan. There's also the ability in the legislation for communities to prepare their own local place plans, and we're just working through the nuances of that, what that means in practice, because I think all local authorities are in the same boat. We want to make sure we're able to adequately resource those where we can, and we're not going to be able to do all of those at once. But that gives a much stronger weight for communities to feed into the process, and those local place plans must have due regard to local development plan, but vice versa. When we are preparing our local development plan, we are required to have due regard to those. As and when we know the detail of the legislation, we'll certainly be out and about speaking to yourselves as elected members, but also to community councils and community groups about how they can be involved, and you know, lots of different techniques for being able to do that.
Any further questions? Comments? Sorry, Councillor Duff, did you have a question there? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Yeah, I've just really one fairly parochial question on Montrose and District. Conscious that there are there were two large identified housing expansion sites in Montrose, one the Sunnyside site and the second the site of Brecon Road. Now, I think your report does indicate that the latter there are significant issues. And I guess we would presumably be looking to add an additional housing sort of development area. I mean, I'm conscious that the other small one, which is Rosemount Road and Hillside, is council land, and some of that land is probably earmarked for an expansion of Rosemount Primary School. So there might well be there's a lack of land effectively being identified in Montrose that can be developed because of principally because of the issues with the Brecon Road site. So is that a reasonable summary of where we are?
I think a fairly good summary. Thank you, Councillor Duff. Yeah, the Brecon Road site, there's issues with the ground conditions of that site. We've had two separate housing developers look at that in detail and have walked away from the site. And what's been useful as part of that process is they've given us, you know, they've been quite open about the financial appraisals that they have done on that site and what the practical reasons for that are. As you note, yes, that does leave us with, you know, potentially looking at alternative sites in Montrose. What we're working on at the moment is we have the minimum annual housing land requirement, which is included in National Planning Framework 4. Working with our housing colleagues on the local housing strategy, but feeding into, from the housing needs and demand assessment, what the housing numbers and housing targets are likely to look like for the next plan. And that will lead us to identify where and what type of scale of sites that we're looking for. All that will be part of the early part of engagement of the next local development plan. Is, you know, is our current strategy sufficient, or do we need to look at alternatives moving forward? And again, that will look at all the settlements of where are the pressures, what is the scale of development that we need to find sites for, and how best do we meet that. So the team will certainly be exploring different options in conjunction with communities and developers themselves.
Last chance for questions. Comments? Nope. Oh, you can make a comment, yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Provost. The comment I have isn't really entirely appropriate for this article and this item on the agenda, but it's really the most appropriate place to say it, I think, given the ones that follow. This year, this calendar year, has been a really challenging one. We had a wonderful spring, and we had a pretty terrific summer, and the early part of the autumn was also excellent, and then it all went pear-shaped, and we landed up with floods, and then not long after that straight into this particularly hard period of weather. And I thought it appropriate to comment, well, firstly on the flooding. Were it not for the flood defences, largely paid for, in fact, funded by the Scottish Government, we would have had 600 houses in Arbroath flooded and a further 300 in Brecon flooded. And I particularly wanted to thank all the Angus Council staff that were so heavily involved in keeping people safe during that period, and also during this hard, frosty period when our staff are out in all weathers working hard for Angus Council and the people of Angus. And it's not just the frontline staff, it's all our staff, all our teachers, all our backroom staff, everyone. They do a splendid job for Angus Council, and I'm sure all right across this chamber we're very thankful for the efforts they make every day, every week for the people of Angus. Thank you.
Yes. Well said. Any further comments? Great. So the council is asked. The council is asked to, 1, agree the Angus Local Development Plan Action Programme 2022 update for adoption, submission to Scottish Ministers and publication, which was Appendix 1, and 2, delegate authority to the Service Leader, Planning and Sustainable Growth to make minor formatting and drafting changes if required. Is that agreed? Moving on to number 11, temporary modular accommodation recreating displaced persons. And we'll get Mark Armstrong to introduce.
Thank you, Provost, and good afternoon, councillors. As members will be aware, Angus has for many months been providing a welcome and support to people who have had to leave their homes and communities in Ukraine since shortly after the Russian invasion earlier this year. Throughout this period, the Council has led a multi-agency response to receiving and supporting both those who have arrived in the county from Ukraine and members of our communities who have acted as hosts and provided accommodation, care and support to these guests. We and our partners have worked hard to meet the asks of both the UK and Scottish governments and have had to remain flexible and responsive to an ever-changing and often rapidly moving landscape. Just as we did throughout the COVID pandemic and more recently the winter storms and floods, working with many partners and community organisations, services across the entirety of the Council have, I believe, managed these challenges admirably and have provided much sought-after refuge for many vulnerable people in their hour of need. The report before Council today seeks to build on this work. At times over the past year, we have had over 250 guests from Ukraine staying in Angus, and as of yesterday, we had 224 people still being supported and cared for across our communities. As with much of our emergency response to the war in Ukraine, the proposals before members today have been developed at a rapid pace and over a very short period of time. As such, and as detailed within the report, with regards to some of the operational details, not all T's have been crossed or I's dotted, but the report before members is seeking a policy commitment from Angus Council to participate in a 12-month pilot with the Scottish Government that will enhance our support to refugees from Ukraine. As a result of the fast-moving nature of this work, I accept that some important aspects of engagement in developing this report have not been as complete as they should have been. This has been particularly the case with local Arbroath members, who I appreciate have a particular interest in this report. As detailed in the abstract, the report advises members of a request from the Scottish Government for Angus Council and our partners to participate in a pilot project to provide temporary modular accommodation for refugees from Ukraine. This temporary accommodation would be an addition to the existing hotel and cruise ship accommodation that is currently available in 21 other council areas in Scotland. There is no similar hotel accommodation in Angus. I stress that this is a time-limited pilot project. As detailed in the report, it is a pilot that would provide temporary accommodation for no longer than 12 months and which will test the use of temporary modular accommodation as part of our overall response to supporting those who have had to flee Ukraine because of the war with Russia. To get to the stage where I could bring this report to Council, across many services and partners, including Angus Health and Social Care Partnership, we have worked closely with Scottish Government officials and their partners Palladium to critically test and consider the suitability of Angus as a council area within which to locate the pilot. Yes, there are unknowns, and as with all things, there are risks and challenges. As detailed in the report, there is a clear risk related to the capacity of health services, specifically GP services, mental health services, and the Arbroath Major and Minor Injuries and Illness Unit. Angus Health and Social Care Partnership have made it clear that a phased approach to the arrival of more refugees from Ukraine would be required to enable them to manage any increased service demands. Another known risk relates to the supply of suitable longer-term accommodation for those who are housed in the temporary short-term accommodation. Clearly, we do not wish an outcome where we are unable to house refugees at the end of the pilot phase and they present themselves as homeless. I cannot downplay these risks as they are real and would need to be very closely monitored and managed through the duration of the pilot. Officers from the outset have highlighted these concerns to the Scottish Government, and they acknowledge our concerns and have sought to assure us that they will work with us to mitigate them. For example, Scottish Government officials have stated, and I quote, "The pilot project will ensure that any modular accommodation ensures a safe and dignified experience for displaced people and improves the sustainability of the super-sponsor scheme going forward." In addition, the senior civil servant leading this on behalf of the Scottish Government has also written to me stating, "I am pleased now to be able to confirm that I am wholly committed to working in partnership with you and your colleagues, Palladium and others as required to pilot modular short-term accommodation on sites in Angus, subject of course to ongoing due diligence and the approval of elected members. As discussed, that partnership will certainly include determinations about the number of modular units placed on a site, the phasing of arrivals, and the exit strategy, because this is for a finite period and I have no expectation of it extending beyond the 12 plus 3 months which we expect to formalise in the lease." The civil servant goes on to say, "I should also stress that across the entire pilot and the 3 locations that are currently being considered in Scotland, the maximum number of guests from Ukraine that we would expect to be accommodated in the temporary modular accommodation is approximately 100 people. Following evaluation, that may grow if there is robust evidence that it works well for single people and couples displaced by the war in Ukraine and local communities and is cost-effective compared with other forms of temporary accommodation." As the report details, it is recommended that the previous St Thomas School site in Arbroath is a suitable site for this national pilot. The reasons for this are detailed in the report at paragraph 410. At paragraph 5.7, I also highlight areas of clarification that we are working on with the Scottish Government. I can advise Council today that even in the short time since this report was finalised, there has been progress on many of these issues. Firstly, confirmation that the lease would be for no more than 15 months and short-term accommodation provided for 15 months maximum. Draft heads of terms have been received and a meeting is scheduled for tomorrow to work on these should Council agree to participate in the pilot. Confirmation has been received of the value of the lease at £8,000 per annum. Very importantly, agreement to a phased and managed arrival of Ukrainian guests at a rate and total number that is manageable to local services and support has been agreed. A statement that the maximum number of guests from Ukraine that the Scottish Government expect to be accommodated as part of the pilot and across the 3 sites being considered in Scotland is 100 people, fewer than we had originally anticipated when we wrote the report. Agreement to jointly develop an exit plan to manage the end of the 12-month accommodation and the transition to longer-term accommodation for those living on the site. helping to mitigate the risk of homeless presentations. And finally, agreement with Palladium to proactively support the integration of the guests from Ukraine within the Arbroath community. For example, the location on the site of a community warm space for use by all. As detailed in Recommendation 3, should Council agree to participate in the pilot, and on the understanding that we conclude a mutually acceptable lease for the Arbroath site, final sign-off will be with Scottish ministers. Thank you for listening, and I am happy to address any questions that members may have.
And before, I'll take the questions first then. I saw Councillor Wan's hand up first. And then Councillor Dorn.
Provost,
Yep.
Councillor Bell has indicated she was wishing
All
to
right,
speak as
I'll
well.
put Councillor Bell down as 3 then. Councillor Devine is 4. Sorry, I know this takes a little bit of time, but it's worth it we do this in this correct order. Councillor Devine.
Councillor Proctor.
Councillor Proctor. Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Councillor Speed, thank you. Will I mark these down? Any further? Councillor Durno, 6. All right, well, we'll go into comments once we've done questions. Right, I'd also like to say, look, before we go into these, you will note that there is an exempt appendix to this report shown as item 13. Members should not make reference to the contents of this appendix in the public part of this meeting. If they wish to discuss the appendix, then they will need to do that in private, just setting that expectations before we move on to the questions, starting with Councillor Wan. Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah, does anyone want to discuss anything? No, that would be private. No, that's good. Sorry.
What do you mean? In terms of the exempt appendix.
Sorry, yes.
Through yourself, Provost. It's just to ask if anybody does want to discuss aspects of the exempt appendix.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to ask if it needed to be exempt, because, and also, yeah, I would want to discuss aspects of it.
Do you want to answer why it can't be exempt, or Mark? Sorry.
Yes, through you, Provost. Thank you very much. The reason the appendix was exempt is it's provided through the Scottish Government really just as an example of the kind of accommodation that they are looking at. They are in the middle of a tendering process to identify and secure potential suppliers for any modular accommodation within this pilot, and it was felt not to be appropriate to present that. One, because members or the public may think, so that is what it's going to look like. I think I can assure you that is not what it will look like. It was really just to give you a flavour of what they are looking at. And the other thing that the Scottish Government have committed to, I think they anticipate they will conclude their tender process this week and will be identifying site visits to their preferred suppliers in the new year. And should the Council agree that they wish Angus Council to participate in that, we are invited to join them on those site visits along with a representative from the Arbroath community. So it was really to protect, one, the commercial interests of the company whose appendix it is, but really to make sure that that wasn't interpreted as this is what the accommodation would look like.
Councillor Wan. Yep.
Why send us something that we are thinking might be like it when it's not like it? It's confusing. Totally confusing. I'm thinking there that this is what we're getting, and now we're being told that this is just an idea. If an architect drew a giraffe, you're not wanting a giraffe built, you want a house built. So why send something that's not going to be happening?
Okay. It will be temporary modular accommodation. And the Scottish Government are working with Palladium to determine who that supplier would be and how that would be located on a site and what other facilities would be part of that that modular site, setup. So possibly it has sadly kind of given members the wrong impression of what the accommodation would look like. But all I can say is that I do not know what they're likely to be commissioning, but they have stated that as soon as they have this short list of suppliers, they will engage and involve us in the determination as to what would be appropriate in Arbroath, and also in terms of how the site could be laid out. But it will be temporary modular accommodation. That is the requirement that they're working.
So any other points? That wasn't your question, that was your point of clarification. Is everyone needing any further points of clarification? Could you put your mic on, Councillor?
Sorry, yeah, Provost. Yeah, just if for this particular aspect of the report, if it can't then be opened up for public discussion, then I think then we do need to have more questions, because for the past week we've been, I guess, looking at this report, that paper, that picture, those drawings, with the impression that that was kind of pretty much what was coming. So it's not really then been helpful at all. So I think we will need to have that discussion around that aspect of the report and proposals.
Okay.
So through yourself, Provost,
Yes,
would members like to go into private session now? Are they accepting that the appendix will be taken as exempt, and therefore we go into private session?
Yeah.
No, you can ask those first. It was just Councillor Speed was specifically asking about the appendix.
Yeah.
Just to seek
And
clarification.
yeah, and just for clarity, it's just a shame that they couldn't have maybe dubbed out the sensitive information and shown what was being put in the report.
So we can now move to questions, but just be careful that it's not in the exempt report. So with that in mind, question number 1 was Councillor Wan.
Point of order.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I'm not clear. We got asked whether or not we wanted to move it to a private session or not. I'm not sure that was clearly defined, that we were moving to a private session or a public session.
No, we're not. I'm reading this, that the things have to either be in private. The bits that are in private is the exempt report number 13. So that's what I'm trying to say. You have to be very careful what you're saying in this part, that you don't err into stuff that's on the exempt report.
But my point, Provost, is that the question was asked whether or not we go to a private session.
Okay.
And we've not determined that. We've asked one councillor whether or not we do that.
Okay.
And then it's kind of gone back and forward. I think that just needs to be cleared up, whether or not we want to go to a private session or remain a public session, and, you know.
Okay. So can officers keep me correct on this? What's the format?
Through yourself,
Yep.
Provost, it'd just be a case of asking members if they wish to go into a private session in terms of the report that's been put forward as private.
No, but at least it's clarified. Thank you.
So through yourself, Provost,
Yep.
can I seek clarification that that it's agreed that the exempt appendix is exempt? That's the first thing. Just to, yes, agreed that it is exempt.
Yep.
But you don't wish to discuss it at the moment.
Councillor Speed.
Public, it's exempt. We've been shown something that actually now we're being told actually it's not going to look like that. So I would prefer the opportunity to be able to then ask, well, what is it going to look like? Why then give us that report? I would like some more questions. Yeah, I'd like to be able to discuss it a bit more.
But we can discuss that bit in private, Councillor Speed.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm asking for that opportunity.
So we're all in full agreement with the move on to the questions that are part of item number 11, and we'll now move on to that.
Okay.
Right, so therefore, Councillor Wan.
Are we sure?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Mr Armstrong. A couple of questions, very quickly. Originally, we're looking at this as 70-odd units. If I picked up this correctly, you said that we're probably only looking to house about 30-odd now, if it's 100 divided by the 3 locations? That's the first question. All right, carry on.
Yeah, when the report was written, the discussions we were having with the Scottish Government was potentially up to 70 units. As I stated in my introduction, they've now clarified that across the entire pilot, across the 3 sites they're considering, they're anticipating it would be a maximum of 100 people. I wouldn't want to say that that would be a third, and that will be subject to the the nature of the conversations that we would have with the Scottish Government about the specifics of any pilot within Angus, and particularly taking account of the pressures that are known within the health services and the capacity to deal with those. So it may be less than a third, it may be more than a third, but that would be determined by and jointly agreed as to what we believed we could manage and cope with within our area.
Yeah.
What funding?
Sorry, I just want to make, just to clarify here, this is now your supplementary question.
Well,
I allowed one earlier on.
It kind of
and
wasn't. They
therefore
were
I'm-
all rolled into one, but Mr.
Yeah.
Armstrong answered it before I got on to the next one, which I didn't mind him doing that. But okay, point taken. Now that we're not confused, I'm going to ask 3 questions in one here. Then and I'll let you think how I'm going to do this. Yeah, speed. After the 15 months. Now, we know the cruise ships were only supposed to be 6 months of a year, and they've lasted a little bit longer than that. What are we going to do with these people when they are displaced out of here after 15 months? Because this is good land for future social housing. And it's a consideration in my ward, because we're speaking about my ward, that we have new and more social housing up there. So after 15 months, if we have to get rid of the or we have to disperse the Ukrainian refugees to other places, are the Scottish Government going to provide us money to house them here locally? Do you think they'll all be happy to move away? Because this war could go on for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, nobody knows. 15 months to me doesn't sound like a long time, but it sounds like a long time on that piece of land when we're crying out for new housing. So it was just really to see what help the Scottish Government are going to give monetary wise, because obviously there's medical, there could be the chance of homelessness, and I've lost my other bit of flow, but that'll do me just now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wan, for that long question.
Thanks. I'll take Councillor Wan's lead and probably give 4 answers to 3 questions in one. So the Scottish Government are very clear and accept that site is part of the Council's Strategic Housing Investment Plan with a project due to come on stream, I think it's 2025. The pilot project is committed to only last for 12 months plus the time to decommission. I think the question is around the support that's available. All the individuals, all the refugees that are arriving in the UK from Ukraine come with funding packages wrapped around them and access to certain rights. So the existing Ukrainian refugees that are in Angus and any additional ones that come in have a package of £10,500 per person wrapped around them, which is supporting them whilst they're living in another country. That would continue to my knowledge, and that would be the subject of discussions both at UK and Scottish Government level, depending, as you say, how the conflict transpires and how long these individuals remain within the country. And that's the resource that has been supporting people to date. The homelessness part is that's recognised as a risk, and the Scottish Government have committed as part of our work on this. We would have a detailed strategy and exit plan as to how we would decommission the site. That work is still to take place because clearly the Council hasn't made a commitment to move forward. But I would envisage that would require to be a kind of phased introduction of people and then a phased exit of people to minimise the risk of having individuals on the site at the end of the period that it's available for temporary accommodation.
I think you'll agree that it's quite difficult for us to make a decision on the basis of not knowing all these facts at the moment, because we've been asked here to, which we welcome.
You can bring that up under comments, Councillor Wan. Councillor Dorn.
Okay, thank you. So for first thing I want to say, exploring extra homes for people who have been displaced from Ukraine is very welcome. And I'm trying to be clear about this question that I'm asking here. From my understanding of what we've discussed is that if we agree to this today, then the housing will be managed by the Scottish Government in relating to the providers of that housing. So I wanted to ask if we could add anything in to seek clarification and assurance within the Section 5 of this paper around certain amenities that might be within those homes relating to cooking and washing and insulation and those things, because that's not detailed in that Section 5 at the minute. And I wondered if that would be possible to do that.
Certainly the conversations that we have had to date with both Scottish Government and Palladium, who are working with them, are that they wish to test this pilot. So they're looking for a solution that is appropriate, it respects people's human rights, protects them over the winter and into the summer. So, and when we have made specific requests, so for example, I mentioned the suggestion that came from local community members that would it be possible to have on the site a shared warm space that could be jointly used by both the Ukrainian residents and any members of the Arbroath community. They were perfectly receptive to that. Other suggestions we're involved in them with relate to, for example, laundry accommodation, the kind of facilities you're talking about, communal spaces. To date, I have had no indication from the Scottish Government that those kind of provisions are not appropriate to the kind of situation that they want to create here to test this model. So, and yeah, I guess your question, can we build them in as requirements? If we are to formalise the lease, these are things that we could say we would wish as assurances that they will be provided. And that would also, I would envisage, could be part of the visit to the suppliers of the accommodation to see exactly what they look like and what kind of standards they meet. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Judy Bell is number 3 for questions. And how do we bring the speaker in? Thank you, Sarah.
I'm not hearing anything.
We're hearing you.
Oh, excellent. That's marvellous. Thank you. Mark, thank you. I guess I'm speaking as chair of the IGB, and I'm grateful for your sensitivity in how you described the challenges that already exist in particularly in primary care, but also in mental health. And I think generally everyone would welcome this. I think it's really good that Angus is extending a welcome to people in need fleeing from dreadful traumatic circumstances. It's possibly too early for you to answer this question, but I wonder if it's been considered. Is there any way of perhaps working with the existing population of Ukrainian people who are here as refugees from the war to potentially extrapolate any health needs data so that we can, I guess, get a bit of a steer? And are you sensing any thresholds from primary care and mental health services around capacity for providing support to numbers, just to help work our way through those sensitivities? Because I am fully aware of the challenges there. And are you looking at, you mentioned the third sector, but it's potentially going to be important to make sure whatever services are provided are trauma informed, trauma aware, and potentially therapeutic. So is that an area that you'll be considering as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Again, 3 questions in one there. So, so in terms of working with the existing Ukrainian population, the Scottish Government are particularly keen to establish an ongoing kind of review and monitoring group as part of the pilot, and that would involve residents of Arbroath. It would involve individuals that are finding accommodation on the site in the temporary modular accommodation. And we also suggested it could involve, and they were really receptive to this, to existing Ukrainian refugees who are in Angus and have experience of being in Angus. And we actually anticipate involving them in the lead up to actually receiving any new Ukrainian refugees on this site, and to build their lived experiences into how the site is developed and how it is utilised. So that is a key part of the the pilot and something the Scottish Government are particularly keen to evaluate, because they want to see if this model is one that individuals who are arriving into Scotland from Ukraine are receptive to, and it works for them, as opposed to them being compelled to go and stay somewhere where they don't want to be. In terms of threshold for primary care, to date, no, other than the acceptance, as I stated, that the pressures around existing services and the conversation we're having with the Scottish Government is around that phased introduction of people into the area, and to monitor that to ensure that services can cope. The other thing I would state, and I accept that this is a kind of ever shifting landscape, and as we move into winter, our experience over the summer is no way reflective of how health services will be pressurised over the coming months. But out of the period over the last 7-8 months that we have had Ukrainian guests in Angus, we've not had brought to our attention through our regular coordinating groups that they are bringing excessive demands on local services. But that's not to say that will not change. But that is one thing we would monitor. And then the third sector aspect, and being trauma informed, again, we want to integrate this with the existing support that exists. So for example, the work that's going on in churches in the Arbroath area and within other groups that exist in communities. And the trauma-informed work is something that we are developing across our whole community planning partnership. So we have rolled that out across the vast majority of in terms of the training, across our frontline services in housing, Revs and Bens, the contact centre, and we're now at the stage where we're developing that to roll out across our community planning partnership. So it's certainly something that we had already committed to do with our community planning partners and to make available to all organisations that are working with any individuals in Angus in relation to any form of trauma, to ensure that they have access and have participated in that training.
Thank you. Councillor. Yep. Yep.
Maybe add to that response?
Yes, yeah, that's a good idea. Gillian, I believe you can add to that response. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Just in relation to the provision of primary care and community mental health services, I think it's fair to say that across the patch primary care services are under pressure, and that is due to ongoing challenges around recruitment and retention of not just general practitioners but the whole multidisciplinary team that we are trying to support practices with. In terms of any additional people coming into the South East locality, the impact that it would have from a phased perspective would obviously be less. I think, but as a partnership and from a primary care perspective, we have to consider the impact that it'll have on access to services and potential increase in waiting times for people to access services. So that's why a phased approach is really important for us. We can't take significant numbers and increases at any one given time. I think the other thing to consider is the minor injury and illness unit, as well as the out-of-hour service. So it's not just daytime that we have to provide the services over, we have to provide services 24/7, and that service is provided across the region. So when we've got the increase in Ukrainian refugees in Angus, Dundee and P&K, the GP primary care out of our service have to be able to respond to that across the patch. And similar to daytime practice, that service is under some pressure as well. Very similar from a community mental health perspective in terms of increased demand, and I think it's no different to any kind of council services as well, the significant pressure that a lot of services are under at the moment, just due to post-COVID and coming out and dealing with some of the outcomes of that, which has had an impact on community mental health teams to be able to support people post-pandemic as well. Happy to take any questions.
No, I think that's fine. And Councillor Devine's next.
Thank you.
Stay close by, because someone may ask questions if the others are coming along. Thanks.
Thank you,
Councillor
Provost. Thank you. It's about this phasing. I would really like to get a clearer idea about that, given that it's only 12 months in all that we're going to have people in this pilot. How would you imagine phasing this? Because obviously you don't want people arriving in these homes about 8 months into it, and then they would only be there 4 months. Would you be thinking of the very early part of the 12 months phasing in? I accept that the health care services do need that phasing in, obviously, but I would just like a bit of clarity around that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Devine. Not sure at this stage I can provide you with the clarity that you're seeking, because I guess this is part of the kind of detail that we still are working through with the Scottish Government. Certainly, I found that clarification that across the 3 sites, the number of individuals that they were seeking to engage in the pilot of 100 as being particularly encouraging. I think that significantly reduces the potential risk and demand that may come into Angus. And I think it's really for us to have the detail of that conversation with the Scottish Government as to what we believe we can cope with. I guess in my head, and just because I'm quite visual, I see a kind of bell curve in terms of building up gradually, getting into the summer where we're probably at a peak, and then managing out of that situation towards the end of the 12-month period. Again, that's about monitoring and managing the demands on services that have been brought into the area, but also managing the exit strategy so that we don't end up with that situation where we have people that we're not necessarily have longer term accommodation for them to move on to. But that is part of I guess what we're seeking to work through here, and we're very clear as partners in Angus as to what we can and cannot cope with. And the Scottish Government to date have been very receptive to hearing, I guess, what we are able to manage within this context. But you know, as with everything, I can't crystal ball gaze, but we will be doing everything, both in terms of the finalising the detail of the lease, and then in terms of managing the implementation of the pilot, to make sure that we're coping with the demands that it's bringing, and that those demands are such that we can deal with them. So you know, and if that means partway through the pilot, again, because it's a pilot, we have to say, well, actually, we envisaged we'd take a few more people at this stage. We can't, because our services aren't able to cope with that additionality.
Councillor Proctor.
Thank you very much. And thank Mr Armstrong for that very lengthy and very detailed paper, which I think we actually all must support, and we've got to support the people from Ukraine. I attended a function 2 weeks ago in our church. We had 30 plus Ukrainian people who are living in Kirriemuir and just outside, and we're very grateful for what the people...
Councillor Proctor, we're on to questions just now.
Yes, I'm just coming on to that. Thank you very much. And very grateful for what we did. My question really is, after one who's lived in portable accommodation, it was supposed to be meant for a year, and lasted something nearly 20. What's the sort of maintenance, and how are we going to maintain these properties? Who's going to be responsible? Because we know that housing, for example, is still clearing the backlog on work for our normal stock. So are we going to be tasked with that, or will the Scottish Government be picking up that bill?
Yeah, the entire responsibility for sourcing the accommodation, locating it on site, and maintaining it sits with the Scottish Government and Palladium. They have a budget set aside for the entirety of that part of the project, and none of that responsibility will sit with the Council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Councillor Speed. Could you put your mic on as well?
Sorry.
Thanks, Lois.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, I wholeheartedly support the Government and Angus Council's ongoing efforts to resettle refugees. However, I do have several questions with regards to these proposals, as do my constituents who have contacted me. I have already submitted several questions prior to this meeting to reduce the amount I would need to ask today. However, I've not received answers to them all. So I will try and be brief and summarise and perhaps do kind of a loaded ask, if that's okay. So to summarise, I'm just wondering, is this the best that we can do? Are these proposals going to improve refugees' quality of life? Who are they being designed for when most of the people displaced are families? Do we know refugees want to still come to Angus when many are leaving? And has other options been explored within our own current stock that has been held and is still vacant? And has engagement been carried out with our current hosts who are reporting vacancies and are also able to offer employment as well as accommodation? What assurances can be given around the reported timescales? And is this the best site? Have we explored enough other options? Is it wise to agree such a short-term solution on a site that can provide long-term accommodation when there are perhaps other options ready available now?
Mr.
I
Armstrong.
didn't really catch all of those, and to be honest, I'm hearing them for the first time. So maybe if you could just take them one at a time, Councillor Speed.
I guess it was probably more of a statement around is this the best that we can do? However, some of that was based on the images and the pictures that were shown in the exempt report. I guess, are these proposals going to improve refugees' quality of life, and who is it being designed for in terms of the demographics of people that are coming, but again, based on the pictures?
Okay.
If
I could provide the response as opposed to just running through the 10 questions again.
Right, okay.
So in terms of the demographics that the Scottish Government are targeting this as, and it's detailed in the report, the vast majority would be single adults, male and female. About a third or 25%, I think they're thinking, would be existing couples. So that's the demographic that they are targeting this pilot at. I don't have access to the intelligence that determines why they've determined that's the need. I presume, but I may be wrong, that that's based on their knowledge of individuals who have received visas to enter Scotland through the super sponsor scheme and that have not yet arrived.
Okay, right. Do we know that refugees want to come to Angus when we already know that some have come and have left and others have been reported as not wanting to come because they've kind of settled and established roots where they currently are?
I guess what we know in terms of those Ukrainian guests that have been in Angus, some of whom are staying, and as you say, some have left. A number of those were here to work on our farms over the summer period and have subsequently left the area. We're not clear on where they have all gone. I'm aware some apparently have gone to Wales, others have gone to areas possibly not even in the UK that we don't know of. And I think that's probably more driven by an economic necessity where those individuals are looking for work. Those others that are staying in Angus, the feedback that we've had has been very positive, both from Ukrainian guests and from hosts. And yes, I think you mentioned hosts that presently have not been matched with an individual. And I guess what this pilot would be seeking to do would be, as an entry point into Scotland and as temporary short-term accommodation, they would then be matched with hosts in the local area. So I think what we're seeking to achieve here is how do we make better use of those hosts that are available in terms of longer-term accommodation. I think we need to remind ourselves that this temporary accommodation is for initial entry into the area and then to be matched into a longer-term hosting relationship or some other, whether it's council housing stock or private rented stock.
Okay, and my next question, that takes us on to my next question, which was around the fact that we do currently have stock that was held aside that's still vacant, and we also know that there are kind of farmers, current hosts who have hosted and had guests who have left, and so they now have further vacancies. Has there been enough work done to kind of look at that kind of availability and vacancy that currently sits?
In terms of the accommodation on farms, a high proportion of that is accommodation that is only licensed to be available in the summer months. So it's not suitable to be used. I guess it comes back to Councillor Doran's point about insulation and suitability of accommodation. It's not suitable accommodation to be, and the licence doesn't allow it to be used over the winter months. In terms of our housing stock, again, you're right, where we have set aside a number of void properties and they have not all been utilised, and the Housing Service are monitoring that on a live basis and trying to get the balance right between the number of properties that we hold vacant potentially to house Ukrainians in, and those that could be used for other other residents. And that again would be something we would monitor throughout the process of this pilot. It's not an exact science, and it's not something that we can say at this point, this is who we know is coming in and this is what their accommodation needs are and this is how we'll accommodate them. But it's an ever evolving and changing picture, and that's how we've been managing it over the last 8 months.
Okay, and I think...
Can I just interrupt for a second? I'll give you one more question. I don't know how many you've got, but I'll give you one more question, because it was, and therefore I'm giving you 10 seconds to choose which one you want the last of those, or Councillor Speed.
Okay, I think what has been raised with me within my constituency is just the query around the short-term nature of the project. And I think people have highlighted that, across the town, there are prefab houses that, are currently still there kind of 40, 50, 60 years later. So it was just around that and the fact that we're building for the short term on a piece of land that can provide longer term housing accommodation for all, which we may need, very shortly.
Well, we have a plan for that site. It's within our strategic housing investment plan. We know how many council houses we wish to build on that, and we've been clear with the Scottish Government that our capacity to make that site available is for the duration of the pilot and for no longer. And that timescale does not in any way impede our existing strategic housing investment plan. I think it's stated in the report that that project is due to come on stream at 25-26. This pilot will be over, decommissioned and away from that site. It does not impact on our housing plan at all.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to comments. Further question, is it? Yes. Councillor Gregg and Councillor Clark. You're a comment. Oh, all right. So Councillor Gregg is 7. We're still doing questions. Some people have now asked for a question. So Councillor Gregg is first with a question. Any further comments? Questions, sorry. Right, Councillor Scott. Right, with that in mind, Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Provost. I'm really quite uncomfortable about being asked to vote on something that I haven't got the full information for. So in the exempt item that was presented to us by email, I think everyone thought that's what was going to be coming or what it was. I'm trying to be very careful about the way I word this question. But they were now being told that that was an example of a possibility and probably wouldn't actually be that. So if we agree to approve the pilot, will we as a council be given a further opportunity to either agree or disagree with whatever form that this modular accommodation is going to come, to make sure that, in our opinion, it meets the needs of the people that are going to be coming to then occupy that, so that it has the space and the facilities and things that are required. Again, trying not to refer to the exempt item, I think a lot of people were a bit upset with that. So will that come back to us for further agreement, or is it a case of once we say yes to the pilot, then that's it, whatever happens to turn up and gets built, well, we'll just have to lump it?
Mr. Armstrong?
Well, first thing I would say, just in terms of some of the language, I don't think we would be wanting to put anything that was perceived as just having to lump it. In terms of the recommendations in the report, it's very clear that if they are agreed today, then officers would go and seek to clarify all those issues through the lease and get the security that we're seeking on this, and then the pilot would move ahead. If the council determined it wanted to agree something different, then that's for the council to determine.
Right, thank you. Yeah, we'll try and keep, I know this is going on, and I'm giving everyone as much chance to have questions as possible, breaking the rules I've said of one question only, but we must be respectful to officers when we're making comments. Councillor Jill Scott.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Provost. Could you just clarify for me? I'm a little bit confused. Is the 3 sites in Angus, or is the 3 sites in Scotland?
The 3 sites are in Scotland, only 1 in Angus.
Right, okay.
And I should clarify, the Scottish Government are working on 3 sites. It may be 1, it may be 2, it may be 3. Just now it's 3.
Right, comments. I saw Councillor Cowdy's hand up first, and Councillor Melville. Hold on. And it's only fair that I do 2 from one side, because I can't look at 2 places in this very large room. So I'll go for Councillor Nicholl as 3. And Councillor Ross Gregg as 4. Leader 5. Councillor 6. Councillor Clark 7. Oh, and sorry, and Councillor Speed 8. Right, we'll see how this goes so far. Right, Councillor Cowdy.
Thank you very much. So I fully accept that there are risks associated with this scheme, as highlighted by Mr. Armstrong, and there is a need for scrutiny, which is something that is rightly occurring here. But the language we use around this is very important, and I was very disappointed to hear an elected member on the opposition use the words "get rid of" in the context of talking about what might happen to the Ukrainian guests in the long run. So I don't think that language was appropriate. On a practical note, I would very much welcome the new and extra detail that Mr. Armstrong provided on the integration of the Ukrainian guests, and I really hope this covers both accessing local services but also helping to create meaningful community connections with the local community, because I believe this is going to be one of the key factors in whether this scheme is a success, and I'm thinking primarily of our Ukrainian guests. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Melville.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Mr. Armstrong. And I just want to join many others in paying tribute to all of the officers that were involved in drawing this up, and to thank the Scottish Government for choosing Angus as a potential participant in this scheme. I don't think any of us should forget that the people coming here from Ukraine are escaping the brutal oppression of a bloodthirsty dictator. Their families and homes are being bombed, and Russian troops are committing war crimes at will. I'm really, really proud, actually, that all of us here stand with the people of Ukraine, and that Angus does have the chance to join this project. And I just want to wish Ukraine very well in their inevitable victory against the Russian invader. Thank you.
Councillor Gavin Nicholl.
Provost, I did member ask first for a comment.
Sorry? Go on. Okay, yeah, no, I'll when I get the 8 done, I will then go around the room again, and I will get you then. Councillor, sorry, so back to Gavin Nicholl. Councillor Gavin Nicholl.
Thank you very much, Provost. I warmly welcome the Ukrainians to Angus, who have had to escape the war in the Ukraine. But I have concerns regarding modular accommodation. Some of these can be no bigger than a garden shed. Any extended stay in such accommodation could greatly impact on a person's welfare and mental health. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ross Gregg.
Thank you, Provost. I wanted to make it absolutely abundantly clear that I think that welcoming the Ukrainian refugees into Scotland and the United Kingdom as a whole is the right thing to do, and I welcome them with open arms. If I had a spare room in my house that I could offer out to them, then I would, but unfortunately I don't have that luxury to be able to do that. I am really quite concerned about this type of accommodation being used, and the fact that they're all going to be clumped in together as almost like a little ghetto of that's where all the Ukrainian people are. I think we should be doing this in a different way to make them part of our communities and part of Angus as a whole. I'm really struggling to agree with this pilot, over and above what we've also heard with the medical aspects and schools and things like that, which are going to increase. Ultimately, I think it comes down to the size of these accommodations and how temporary is temporary. Having spent 8 weeks in a hotel room at Charles de Gaulle Airport when I did a secondment, that was difficult enough, and I did that through my own choice, but I was very glad to be able to get home. So to be able to spend up to a year plus 3 months in effectively what could possibly be a shipping container that's been decked out as accommodation, I'm concerned by that, and the welfare of the people that are fleeing the war-torn country to then come and live in that. I think we as a nation and we in Angus probably could do better than that.
Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you, Provost. I think there was a little bit of misunderstanding coming out through some of the comments there. This, remember, is a pilot programme for immediate temporary accommodation until more permanent accommodation can be found. Also, I don't know where the confusions come from around about the appendix, because it clearly states in the report that this is a purely indicative example of the sort of temporary accommodation to be used. So I don't see where the confusions come from, unless some people haven't read the report, perhaps. I totally welcome the report. I appreciate the work that's been done by officers to facilitate this. As some other members have mentioned, these are people fleeing from a war zone, and they really need our help. And I trust that all the community partners will work together to provide the warm Scottish welcome that we know that they deserve. So thank you very much, Mr Armstrong, for all the information you've given us, and good luck with the scheme.
Councillor Meechan.
You can probably hear me anyway. I've got quite a loud voice. Firstly, I would like to welcome this report, and also Mr Armstrong's additional detail, which is very helpful. I would also like to welcome the Scottish Government's forethought here in providing a warm space. Now, we're talking about maybe 30 individuals who will have a warm space. Maybe we could learn something from this approach.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
I hope you can hear me. You usually can. I don't speak a lot in here, although I tend to speak for Scotland out with here. But there's a few things I'm going to pick up here. And one is, well done. I fly the Ukraine flag at home, not because I want everybody to notice me, because I went to school with lots of Ukrainians in the early 50s. And they stayed here, along with Italians and others. And I learned their names, learned a bit of the language. I've forgotten it now, of course. They stayed here after their fathers and grandfathers were in the war. Some of them lost their lives. So to get the opportunity to help, and there's nobody in this room doesn't want to help, but to get the opportunity to help is something that I relish. A pilot here will give us some information as well as other things. It will actually garner information. You speak about the voluntary sector coming in. That'll give advocacy, mentoring, buddying, all the things that we need to help people on their way. But recently, as a Deputy Provost, I had the privilege of standing beside people getting their citizenship for the other Earths, I look forward to some of these people getting their citizenship. So I'm not going to exalt anybody or anything, because this is a big team effort. But thanks for bringing this today, Mark.
Thank you. Councillor Speed.
Yep, thank you, Provost. Yeah, just to reiterate again that I wholeheartedly support the resettlement of refugees within Angus. I think it's only right that we've kind of scrutinised this, because we want to ensure that we are able to provide them with the best start, the best accommodation that we can within the resources that we have, and that we are indeed going to help improve their quality of life, even if it is just in the short term. I think Councillor Cowdy was right in terms of our community engagement and the community response, and I guess that would be my ask moving on, that we do engage the community in the area of Arbroath, East and Lunan, so that they are prepared and ready and too can open their arms. Thank you.
Councillor Durno.
Okay, thank you, Provost. Obviously, this is my area of Arbroath that we're talking about today, and I just wanted to give a wee bit of a reality check here. The police record for the month of November, there was 126 crimes recorded in this area. 2 violent, 5 sexual crimes, 34 dishonesty crimes, 15 fire-raising crimes, 15 drugs crimes, 38 assaults, 14 traffic offences, and we have youth causing antisocial behaviour. When we have people fleeing persecuting and terrible situations with real urgency, this is one of the most deprived areas of Angus. Is this the best place for them to begin recovery? I think that questions should be asked as well, because I think they deserve...
We're on to comments, not questions.
Sorry, that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Braze.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I'm looking through the recommendations here at the head of this report, and there's none of them that I disagree with. I'm entirely supportive of this pilot project for all the reasons that have been stated. And, you know, I accept, firstly, that I think there's unanimous support for the Ukrainian people across this chamber, and we all want to do our best for them. But, you know, if elected members have concerns about going forward with this project, now's your chance to bring forward an amendment to stop going forward with this project. But this is the one that's on the table. This is the one that the Scottish Government are seeking our help with for the Ukrainian people. This is what's in front of us. We either support this or we don't. We're not really here at this agenda item to be discussing anything else we might do for the Ukrainian people. So if you really don't like the idea of this pilot project, now's your chance to vote against it by bringing forward an amendment.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Councillor Braze has pretty much said a part of what I was going to say about the recommendations in the report. If you look at what we're actually being asked to agree, to approve, to agree and to agree in the report, there'll be nothing that anybody in this room would go against, I would say. I completely disagree with Councillor Durno. I think the St Thomas school site is a good one. We've got new accommodation there that Angus Council's recently built. But I think the language we use around this is very important. I mean, I don't think it's right to be describing it as a garden shed. I don't think it's right to be describing it as a ghetto. To be describing it as these people will be living in shipping containers. That's not what's being proposed. And again, if we look at the recommendations, it says in recommendation that officers receiving satisfactory assurances in recommendation 4. We've got the clarification that we need to be able to approve this. We've got everything that we need for us to trust our officers to deliver this project. Mark Armstrong has done a power of work to get this paper to this position. This is Angus Council helping fleeing Ukrainians from persecution, And I think it's very important that we actually look at what we're being asked to recommend. And if councillors feel that Angus Council should be doing more to help Ukrainians, that comes up in a different paper. That comes up in a different proposal. And I would encourage, you know, if you want to do that, bring it forward. Let's see what we can do if we can. But like I say, we need to be very careful about the language we use around this. We need to be factual in our interpretation of what's going on. For example, there will be no children. It's in the paper. These are single people or couples. So we're not going to put pressure in other ways like some people have maybe mentioned. I'm not having a pop. I'm just saying let's have a look at what the recommendations say and what do we actually agree to. Scrutiny is vitally important. I think Heather's question about and getting clarification about the leases and things like that was absolutely spot on. Like I say, that's all I want to add to it. But I think just read the recommendations.
Councillor Cheap.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Provost. It's got to echo the last two speakers entirely on this. I was going to bring up the idea that if they're not happy if people aren't happy with any aspects of this, yeah, they have the opportunity to bring an amendment. I would like to thank you, Mr. Armstrong, on this because I think clearly a lot of work's gone into this. If we stand back from it all, what we're trying to do is help people here, those most in need, and it's a pilot project at the end of the day. And we might learn from a pilot project as councillors because hopefully when the Ukrainian issue goes away and these people can go back to their homelands where they want to go, we might be able to learn from this. And when we've got more other emergency circumstances, and I think of the homeless, for example, this may be an example. What we learn from this may allow us to think in other ways of how we can help the homeless. So I'm in full appreciation of the report and would support it. And the previous speakers are right. If we want to bring an amendment to this, then people should do that. But this is what's on the table, and this will allow it to move forward as a pilot project.
Councillor Proctor.
Thank you very much. No. Yeah. Thank you. As I said earlier on, I actually was fortunate enough to meet up with some 30 or so Ukrainian people, ranging from little carpet crawlers, ankle biters, to grannies who were sort of probably even some of them older than me. And the message that came to across very clearly to me how grateful they were to be in Scotland, how grateful they were to be in Crimea, how grateful they were to be in Angus, and they really, really appreciated what people in this country are doing for them. I honestly feel that if you are escaping from your houses being shelled daily, safety, not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow, any accommodation in a safe area will be very welcome. And I think that what's on offer, what we've seen on offer, as long as it is a temporary accommodation, will be welcomed by these people. And I do feel that Mr. Armstrong has answered all the questions, and we were quite right to scrutinise, but Mr. Armstrong has answered all the questions honestly and fairly. I think it's a great project, and I think, just like what Councillor MacDonald said, you know, in Angus we are fortunate that we've been selected to actually take part in this very worthwhile project. So I would go ahead and I fully support all the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Councillor Shepherd.
Thanks, Provost. I would also like to thank Mark Armstrong for this report, and the fact that the preferred site is in Arbroath, I think will be a benefit to Arbroath long term. I look forward to the Ukrainian people coming, and I think they'll enrich the Arbroath community. So very much looking forward to that. And I think we also need to remember that, as people have said already, they're fleeing war, and I know if I was fleeing war, I'd be delighted of this type of accommodation. It's a safe place, and they can get on and live their lives. I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Shepherd. Any further comments? Oh, Councillor, yeah, can I? Did you want? Are you wanting to answer that, or are you wanting me to? Sorry.
I really just would like to make the point. I do appreciate the kind of personal thanks, but I do want to stress this is a huge team that is behind this, not just the council, but our Health and Social Care Partnership, Police Scotland, all of our partners have worked together with the Scottish Government to bring this report here. And I think it's important to recognise the significant contribution that an awful lot of people have made to make this work.
Well, that would be a nice comment to finish with, and I hopefully that is, but I'll scan the room quickly once more. Yeah. Could you, maybe you could, if you don't mind, Jack.
Through yourself, Provost.
Yes,
the Provost was indicating that he was going to, I guess, move to
Yes, I was going to move on to the recommendations.
I was conscious that there was the exempt appendix, and one member in particular asked if that could be discussed, and I just want to, through the Provost, ask if that's still the case.
I think it's fine. I think I was thinking we were going to do it previously before we went on to the public paper. So no, I'm okay. I can always ask questions after the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. So therefore, moving on to recommendations. 1 to note, 2 to agree, 3 to note, 4 to approve, 5 to note, 6 to agree, 7 to delegate authority to the Deputy Chief Executive in consultation with the Director of Legal and Democratic Services, 8 to note, 9 to agree, and 10 to note. Thank you. Now move on to the possible exclusion of... Oh, right. Thank you. Thank you.
Could we
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Stop the live stream, please?